If you shoot Nikon, there's a good chance you have seen some old professional lenses selling for prices that seem surprisingly low. Not because these lenses suddenly stopped being good, but because the market moved on. Mirrorless cameras became the focus, newer autofocus systems arrived, and many photographers started overlooking older F-mount glass. But that does not mean these lenses lost their value. Today, we are looking at 5 Nikon Pro lenses that became ridiculously cheap, and why they might deserve a second look from photographers like you. You are watching Alt Buzz Lenses, subscribe for classic glass, real lens stories, and the gear photographers still remember. At number 5, we have the Nikon AF DX Zoom-Nikkor 17 to 55mm f2.8 GIFED. Pull this lens out of any camera bag from the mid-2000s and you immediately understand what it was built for. This was not a kit zoom. It was not a starter option dressed up in a larger housing. The 17 to 55mm f2.8G was engineered for photographers who needed a serious working zoom on a crop sensor body, something that could cover events, portraits, interiors, and documentary work without asking the photographer to slow down or compromise. Mounted on a D200 or a D300, it made those cameras feel complete in a way that no consumer zoom ever could. That constant f2.8 aperture across the entire focal range was the specification that separated working glass from everything below it. The autofocus was quick. The build felt dense and deliberate, and the image quality held up through the kind of real-world shooting that puts gear under genuine pressure. Photographers who used a D300 with this lens mounted knew exactly what that combination felt like in the hand. It felt ready. Not aspirational, actually ready. That is what the 17 to 55mm f2.8 gave the DX generation of Nikon shooters, and it is the thing the lens still offers to any photographer willing to pick one up on today's used market. It became more affordable because the world around it changed rather than the lens itself. DX users drifted towards smaller mirrorless systems. Full-frame buyers never needed it to begin with. And photographers still on crop sensor DSLRs started asking whether a lens this large and heavy still made sense for their shooting. The used market answered honestly, but for photographers still running a D300, D500, or any capable high-end Nikon DX body, a healthy copy of this zoom is worth considerably more than its current price suggests. The limitation worth keeping front of mind is simple. This is a DX format lens, built for crop sensor coverage and nothing beyond that. It also carries real weight. Nobody should approach this expecting mirrorless portability. But if DX Nikon is still your platform and you want to know what a professional standard zoom actually felt like in that era, this is it. At number 4, we have the Nikon AF Nikkor 180mm f2.8 DIFED. Not every professional telephoto lens needed to announce itself from across the room. The 180mm f2.8D was the kind of lens that fit inside a camera bag alongside everything else, sat quietly until it was needed, and then delivered telephoto reach that felt genuinely fast. And in the hands of photographers who understood how to use a prime lens under pressure, that simplicity was not a restriction. It was a clarity that zooms rarely offer. This lens belonged at the edge of a sports field beside a stage or in the hands of a photographer working a concert without enough room to move around. It put Nikon shooters at f2.8 and 180mm, a focal length that sits exactly between the intimacy of an 85mm portrait prime and the scale of the longer super telephotos that most working photographers could not afford or carry comfortably. Portrait photographers trusted it. Stage photographers trusted it. Sports photographers building lighter kits used it to punch into the frame without dragging around a much larger lens. The build reflected its professional purpose: dense, controlled, and made for repeated use rather than occasional display. Why is it more accessible now? Because the modern buyer tends to want zoom flexibility, image stabilization, and native mirrorless autofocus, and the 180mm f2.8D offers none of those things by current standards. The world moved toward options that could do more at once, and a fixed telephoto prime without stabilization started to look like a specialization rather than a strength. The compatibility reality is something every buyer needs to understand clearly before purchasing. This lens uses a screw-drive autofocus system, which means the camera body itself must supply the autofocus motor. Many capable Nikon DSLRs can do that without any issue, but many mid-range and entry-level bodies cannot. On a Nikon Z camera through an adapter, autofocus is not guaranteed, and manual focus may be the realistic day-to-day expectation. There is also no vibration reduction. Neither of those things erases what this lens still offers, but both of them need to be in any honest buying decision. At number 3, we have the Nikon AF Zoom-Nikkor 17 to 35mm f2.8 DIFED. Think about the places where photographers have to work fast and without margin. Crowded wedding receptions where the dance floor is packed and the light is low. News assignments where the moment is already happening and there is no time to reposition. City streets mid-event. Documentary situations where waiting is not a strategy and the frame is always moving. This was the lens built for those conditions. The 17 to 35mm f2.8 DIRU was a professional wide-angle zoom designed for photographers who needed to close the distance, work at speed, and trust their glass to hold up under whatever the assignment threw at it. It was built for the kind of work where the photographer had to already be inside the story. The constant f2.8 aperture made it useful when the light dropped. The 17mm end allowed photographers to fill a frame even in spaces that offered no room to step back. The build was solid and serious, the kind of physical presence that reminded photographers they were holding a tool rather than a product. And in the era when photojournalism, wedding photography, event coverage, and documentary work all ran primarily on Nikon F-mount DSLRs, this lens was the wide-angle zoom that made a professional kit feel complete. It was not affordable when it was current. Wide-angle professional zooms at f2.8 carried prices that reflected the engineering inside them, and the 17 to 35mm f2.8D was no exception. The used market shifted its value because native Z-mount wide zooms arrived with newer optical designs, lighter builds, image stabilization, and faster autofocus. Photographers moving to mirrorless had better native options waiting for them and no longer needed to carry a heavy F-mount wide zoom. But for a photographer on a compatible Nikon DSLR who wants fast wide-angle reach with a real professional history behind it, this lens still delivers the experience it was built for. What to watch on used copies is condition more than anything else. Inspect carefully for autofocus health, zoom ring smoothness, haze, fungus, and any sign of impact damage. Buy from a seller who offers a genuine return window, and judge the optical performance honestly against its generation, not against current flagship Z-mount glass. Those are two very different comparisons. If you are enjoying this and you want more stories about classic lenses and the glass working photographers still respect, subscribe to AltBuzz Lenses right now. We are only halfway through this list, and the next two lenses are where it gets genuinely serious. At number 2, we have the Nikon AF Zoom-Nikkor 28 to 70mm f2.8D IFED. They called it the Beast. That was not affection. That was a description: large, heavy, expensive. Built like Nikon, expected it to survive a professional working life without complaint. The 28 to 70mm f2.8D was the flagship standard zoom of its era, and photographers who could afford it knew exactly what they were purchasing: a lens that covered the most important working range with a constant f2.8 aperture and a physical weight that made every camera body it touched feel more serious. The 28 to 70mm f2.8 was the zoom that made photographers feel like they had finally crossed out of consumer territory and into something that meant business. This was not a lens people picked up on a deal. This was a lens photographers worked toward. Newer 24 to 70mm designs eventually replaced it with a wider focal range, updated coatings, and improved autofocus performance. Mirrorless changed the conversation entirely. And then, the beast developed a reputation on the used market that no honest review can separate from an evaluation of the lens itself. Aging AFS motor, issues and focus-related failures are a known concern with older copies. Owners have discussed this widely. Repair communities have flagged it consistently. That reputation is part of the reason the used price looks as attractive as it currently does, and it is precisely why this section needs to be direct. This lens is not a safe bargain. It is a powerful former flagship that can still be exceptional when the copy is healthy. The difference between those two things is everything. Before buying any used copy, test autofocus thoroughly across the full focus range. Listen for hesitation or unusual motor noise. Check for focus inconsistency across different distances and lighting conditions. Buy only from a seller who offers a real return window, or from a source with trusted and detailed condition grading. The cheapest listing is rarely the right decision with this particular lens. Paying more for a copy that has been properly tested is often the smarter investment. When the copy is right, the beast still earns the name. But knowing whether the copy is right requires more due diligence than most lenses on the used market demand. At number 1, we have the Nikon AF Zoom-Nikkor 80 to 200mm f2.8 DED. For a generation of Nikon photographers, an 80 to 200mm f2.8 was the lens that communicated something specific before a single frame was taken. It said that the photographer carrying it understood what serious telephoto glass actually felt like. Sports photographers used it from the sidelines. Wedding photographers used it from the back of the venue when the ceremony was underway and no one could move. Concert photographers used it from restricted positions 30 or 40 meters from a stage. Portrait photographers used it to compress backgrounds in ways that shorter lenses simply could not produce. The 80 to 200mm f2.8 DED showed up at the work that mattered. And it showed up reliably enough to build a reputation that outlasted the generation of cameras it was originally designed for. What made it professional was never one specification in isolation. It was the combination of everything working together. A constant f2.8 aperture held through the full telephoto range. A focal sweep that covered the most practical reach for real working situations, from the slightly compressed portrait end at 80mm to the genuine telephoto pull at 200mm. A build that felt like it was intended to be used rather than handled carefully. This was not a lens people bought because it was accessible. For much of its active life, it was not. It was a lens photographers saved for, worked toward, and held onto because finding something equally capable at a comparable price was never easy. Today, healthy copies appear on the used market for a fraction of what this lens once represented as a professional purchase. That distance between what it cost then and what it costs now is the clearest version of the story this entire video is trying to tell. The 80 to 200mm f2.8 DED did not lose its focal range because mirrorless arrived. It did not lose the telephoto reach that made wedding and sports and event photographers depend on it for real assignments. What changed is the market around it. Buyers who once needed it moved to native mirrorless systems. The lens found its way into a used market that is not fully caught up with what a healthy copy still offers the right photographer. The limitations are real, and they belong in any honest evaluation. This is a heavy lens. There is no vibration reduction. The autofocus system is screw drive, which means a compatible Nikon DSLR body with an internal autofocus motor is required for autofocus to function at all. Entry-level and many mid-range Nikon bodies will not drive it. On Nikon Z cameras, through an adapter, autofocus is not guaranteed. and photographers who need the fastest native mirrorless autofocus performance will find better options in the current lineup. But for photographers working with a D700, D750, D800, D850, D300, D500, or any comparable capable Nikon DSLR, a healthy copy of this lens is one of the most direct expressions of what former Nikon Pro Glass still delivers. Not because it is modern, because it was built for real work, and that work never actually changed. Which old Nikon Pro lens would you still trust for paid work today? And if there is a former Nikkor flagship that should have made this list, defend it in the comments. We read everyone. These lenses became cheaper because the market moved forward, but the work they were built to do never disappeared. For the right photographer, on the right body, with a healthy used copy in hand, they still offer more than a low price. They offer a piece of Nikon's working history. If that kind of story is what you come here for, subscribe to AltBuzz Lenses.